He stacked the trash bags on the porch, the way you set out something that smells. 3 black bags, everything I owned, in 3 bags, on the porch of the house I had lived in for 12 years. 6 years I bathed, fed, and carried the woman who raised us both. He never learned which of her pills went with breakfast, but the will had his name on it. And here is the part he didn't know. Because I didn't know it yet either. That will was signed on a day. Our grandmother was unconscious in an intensive care bed. 40 miles from the kitchen table, where the paper says she sat and signed it. Today, I read wills for a living. I work in probate. That is the court process that sorts out what the dead leave behind and who it belongs to. 4 years after that morning on the porch, I finally read the will that was used to throw me out, line by line, page by page. Then, I took back the house. I took back the money. I took back 4 years of rent he had collected on a home that was never his. All of it. Legally. Using his own paperwork against him. My name is Marisol Vega. I am 34 years old. If you've ever been the one your family used up and set out on the porch like garbage, counted on for everything, counted as nothing. This story is for you. Stay with me. The ending is worth it, and when we get there, I'll ask you for one word in the comments. Just one. Just for now. Let me take you back to where it started, because to understand what I did 4 years after that morning, you have to understand the 12 years that came before it. 12 years before that morning on the porch. My father died. I was 22. He was a shift supervisor at a bottling plant outside Dayton, Ohio, and his heart stopped in the break room before lunch. He was 51. My mother, Carol, handled the funeral the way she handled everything. Beautifully, publicly. She wore gray, not black, because black was for people who wanted pity. My older brother Denny gave the eulogy, 25 then. Already selling insurance. Already the kind of man who shook hands with both hands. I sat next to my grandmother, Rosa, my father's mother, who held my hand through the whole service and didn't say a word. After the funeral, I overheard my mother in the kitchen telling her sister that the life insurance would cover the house, and Denny would manage the rest. Then she said something I want you to hear exactly, because you are going to hear it again. Her sister asked whether I would get anything, since I'd been the one driving Dad to his cardiology appointments for a year. And my mother laughed, a small, warm, hostess laugh, and said, "Oh, we don't do it like that. We're not keeping score. Marisol knows that. In this family, we're not keeping score. We're not keeping score." Hold on to that sentence. It is the most important sentence in this entire story. And it does not mean what she thinks it means. You'll see. 2 weeks after the funeral, my grandmother Rosa fell on her back steps and cracked 2 ribs. She was 74, a widow, living alone in the house on Corliss Avenue that she and my grandfather had paid off in 1991. There was a family phone call. I was standing in my apartment kitchen with a lease renewal on the counter. My mother said someone needed to stay with Rosa while the ribs healed. Denny said he had a family. His wife was pregnant then. My mother had her hands full, settling my father's affairs. Then there was a pause, and I felt the whole conversation turn and look at me the way a room looks, at the person nearest the door when something needs carrying. I said, I could do a few weeks. I let the lease renewal expire. I packed 2 suitcases. My grandmother met me at the door of the Corliss Avenue house and pressed something into my hand before I even set the bags down. A brass key on a loop of red string, her spare. She said, "This is yours now, not borrowed. Yours." I hung it by the door on a little cup hook next to hers. And I thought nothing of it. It was a key. It opened a door. That was all it meant. Then, a few weeks became a few months. A few months became the rest of her life. I'll be honest. Because this story only works if I am. Those first years weren't a sacrifice. I loved that house. I loved her. Rosa was the only person in my family who ever asked me a question and then waited for the answer. I got a job at a dental office 10 minutes away, front desk and billing, and came home every evening to a woman who wanted to know what I thought about things. We ate dinner at 6. On Sunday mornings, she made coffee that could strip paint, and we did the crossword out loud, badly, and laughed. If you've ever had one person in your family who actually saw you, then you know those years were not a debt I was paying. They were the inheritance. But while I was living those quiet years, the story being told about me at every holiday table was a different story, and I didn't find that out until it was almost too late to matter. 9 years before that morning on the porch, I heard the version of my life my family had written for me. It was Thanksgiving, at my mother's house. After dinner, I was carrying plates into the kitchen, and I stopped in the hallway because I heard my name. Denny's wife was talking to my mother's sister, low, the way people talk when they think the person they're discussing is safely in another room. She said, "Well, it works out for Marisol. Honestly, no rent, no bills. Rosa's Social Security covering the groceries. Some people would call that lucky." And my mother's voice came in over the top of it, smooth as icing, and said, "We don't begrudge her. Marisol never really launched. This way, she is useful. Useful. What T is full. I did the thing I had been trained my whole life to do. Nothing. I carried the plates in. I rinsed them. But in the car driving home, Rosa looked out the window and said, apropos of nothing, "They talk about you like you are a bill. They're glad someone else is paying." I asked her what she meant. She just patted my hand and said, "It is written down. Don't worry. Everything important gets written down." I thought she was talking the way old women talk. I was wrong, and it would take me 11 years to find out how wrong. That detail matters later. Hold on to it. Here is what useful actually looked like. I paid rent to no one. True, what I paid instead was everything else. My paycheck covered the property taxes when Rosa's savings ran thin. It covered the new water heater, the winter I was 25, her eyeglasses, her orthopedic shoes, the co-pays her insurance wouldn't touch. I didn't track it. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters to how this ends. I never wrote down $1. We weren't keeping score. I had actually believed that sentence. I was the only one in the family who did. 6 years before that morning on the porch, everything changed in the space of one phone call. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, the hospital called. Rosa had had a stroke. A neighbor found her in the backyard by her tomato plants, and by the time I got there she was stable, but her left side didn't work right anymore, and her speech came slow, like her words had to walk uphill. The doctors said she could come home, but never alone again. She would need help dressing, bathing, cooking, managing 9 medications on 4 different schedules. A hospital social worker sat the family down and laid out the option. A care facility would run about $6,200 a month. Rosa's income was $1,400. The gap was the size of a second mortgage. Every month, forever. The other option was family. I watched my mother and my brother perform their unavailability, like choreography. Denny had his career and his kids. My mother, and I am quoting her, said, "I am 60. I can't lift a grown woman. Marisol is young, and she is right there." And then she turned to me, in front of the social worker, and delivered the line with the warmth of a woman offering me a gift. "You are so good with her, and it is not like you have a real career." To interrupt, nobody voted. Nobody needed to. The vote had happened years before, in hallways, at holiday tables, in every conversation about how lucky I was. If you've ever been volunteered for a sacrifice by the very people who would never make it themselves, you know the sound that room made. It made no sound at all. It just looked at me and waited. I quit the dental office. That Friday, my boss held my last paycheck a moment and said, "They should be paying you for this, family or not. Get something in writing." I laughed it off. Writing was for strangers. We weren't keeping score. I was 30 years old. I want to put the next 6 years in front of you, honestly. Without violins, caregiving is not a montage. It is waking at 2 in the morning because you heard a floorboard and being at her door before you are fully conscious. It is learning that the blue pill is with breakfast and the white one is never with grapefruit, and the little yellow one is what keeps her heart in rhythm, and it cannot, ever, be late. It is doing her hair every Sunday because she said a woman should have her hair done, even if only the mailman sees her. It is her laugh, come back slow and lopsided after the stroke, but come back. And it is this, which I noticed and misread for 6 straight years. Every night, after I got her settled, Rosa sat at the kitchen table with a composition notebook. A cheap one, the kind with the blue marbled cover, 70 sheets, wide ruled. She wrote in it for 10, 15 minutes, slowly. After the stroke, her right hand doing careful work. If I came in, she'd close it, not fast, not guilty, just done, and slide it into the drawer under the window. The drawer stuck. You had to lift it as you pulled. I can still feel exactly how. I assumed it was expenses. I assumed my grandmother, who saved rubber bands and rinsed foil, was tracking what I cost her. Groceries for 2 instead of 1, the extra. Electricity. I assumed that blue notebook was the ledger of what I owed. And some nights, walking past that drawer, I felt the weight of it. Even in the one house where I was loved, I thought I was being tallied. Remember the blue notebook. I'm going to open that drawer for you before this story ends. And I need you braced for what is actually in it. Because I wasn't. 3 years before that morning on the porch, my brother came to the house with a folder. This is the scene I replayed 1,000 times afterward, because I should have seen everything coming. And I saw nothing. It was a Saturday. In spring, Denny showed up unannounced with coffee from the good place. My first warning, because Denny never brought anything anywhere. He sat with Rosa at the kitchen table, made 20 minutes of small talk, then opened the folder and slid papers in front of her. And I heard the phrase, power of attorney. That is a document that lets one person legally act for another. sign their checks, sell their property, make their decisions. In the right hands, it is a shield. In the wrong hands, it is a skeleton key. He pitched it gently. Just in case. He said, you shouldn't have to worry about paperwork at your age. Grandma, let me carry that for you. It is what family does. And my grandmother, whose speech was slow, but whose mind was a straight razor, looked at those papers for a long moment. Then she pushed them back across the table with the 2 working fingers of her left hand and said the sentence, I want you to keep. She said, no, Mijo, it is already handled. Everything important in this house is written down. And it is written down where it needs to be. Denny's face did something I'd never seen it do. Just for a second, the salesman fell off it. And underneath was a man doing arithmetic. Then the smile came back. He kissed her forehead, and he left, taking the folder with him. That night at dinner, Rosa said, without looking up from her soup, when I am gone, this house is yours. You know that. I told her not to talk like that. She pointed her spoon at me and said, I am not talking. I am telling. It is handled. Then she asked if there was more bread. And we never spoke of it again. I didn't ask how it was handled. I didn't ask where the writing was. Or with whom. You want to shake me. I know. I've wanted to reach back through time and shake myself. But you have to understand what I believed back then. I believed that a promise from Rosa Vega was harder than concrete, and I was right about that. What I didn't believe, what I couldn't imagine, was that someone in our family would look at that concrete and go rent a jackhammer. Because here is what I found out much later from documents with dates on them. So this isn't guessing. 11 days after that Saturday, Denny requested a copy of the deed to the Corliss Avenue house from the county recorder. A month later, he had it valued through a broker friend. The paid-off house was worth roughly $310,000. He knew that number 3 years before she died. That folder never really left. It just went home and waited. 5 months before that morning on the porch, the second stroke came. And it did not knock like the first one. It broke the door down. It was a Sunday in March. I was doing her hair, and her head went heavy against my hand. I've tried for 4 years to describe it better than that. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock over the stove the whole time. Doing the compressions, the dispatcher counted out loud over the phone. She survived. That is the wrong word. Her body stayed. She was taken to St. Vincent's Medical Center, 40 miles away, because it had the stroke unit. She was in intensive care for 21 days, from March 8th to March 29th. Most of it sedated, on a ventilator. I drove the 40 miles every single day. I read to her. I did the crossword out loud, alone, badly, and told her the answers were her fault. Now, one plain fact, and I need you to carry it, because this fact is the hinge the rest of this story turns on. During those 21 days, Denny visited the hospital exactly once. He came alone on a weekday when I wasn't there. A nurse mentioned my brother had stopped by. When I texted to thank him, he wrote back 4 words, just handling some paperwork. The date of that visit was March 11th. Remember, March 11th. Rosa came home in April, but only in the way a tide comes home. Hospice was set up in the living room. That is care that isn't trying to cure anymore, only to keep a dying person comfortable. A hospital bed by the front window, where the light was. A nurse, 3 times a week. Me, all the hours in between. One thing from those last weeks. Not to break your heart, but because it turned out to matter. One evening in May, when her voice was mostly gone, I was tidying the kitchen, and I lifted the sticky drawer under the window to close it properly. And the blue composition notebook was there. Same as ever, and I stopped. She was watching me from the bed. Across the room, she couldn't say much anymore, but she looked at the drawer. And she looked at me, and she moved her 2 good fingers in a small motion, like writing. Then she smiled, the lopsided smile. I thought she was telling me that her accounts were in order. I said something stupid and light, like, "I know, Grandma. You've got receipts on all of us." And she laughed. It cost her something to laugh by then. And she spent it on that. She died on a Tuesday morning in June, 3 weeks before the porch. It was quiet. Her hand was in my hand, and the last thing that hand ever did was squeeze mine. Once. So faintly. I've spent 4 years deciding whether it happened. I've decided it did. I get to decide. I was the one there. 6 years of days. And I was there for the last one. Hold that up next to 4 words. Just handling some paperwork. Because the rest of this story is the distance between those 2 sentences, and what it cost him to cross it. The funeral was small, and my mother made it about the flowers. 8 days later, Denny called a family meeting at the Corliss Avenue house. My house. I still thought, in the simple way you think a fact you've been told by the most honest person you know. He stood in Rosa's living room, where the hospital bed had been, and took a document out of a folder, the folder. And he said Grandma had left a will, and that the will named him executor. That is the person legally in charge of carrying out a dead person's wishes. And that the will left the house, the savings, everything, to him. I asked when it was signed, in a voice that didn't sound like mine. He said, this spring. He said she'd wanted her affairs in order after the stroke. He said it so smoothly, with such rehearsed reluctance, that my own mother squeezed his hand in sympathy. For him. For the burden of inheriting a paid-off house. I said. She told me the house was mine. She told me it was handled. And my mother, not Denny, my mother, sighed the sigh she'd been perfecting my whole life and said, Marisol, please, don't do this. Don't turn your grief into a grievance. You got to live there. Rent-free for 12 years. Some people would say you already got your inheritance. And then, because God has a sense of humor, she actually said it. Let's not start keeping score now. I didn't fight. I want to be honest about that, too. Because the internet is full of stories where the narrator delivers the perfect speech in the moment. And this is not one of those stories. I was 3 weeks from losing the person I loved. Most in the world. I had no money, no lawyer. 6 years out of the workforce. I had a brother holding a 2-page document with a signature on it and a notary stamp. That is the official seal from a licensed witness that is supposed to prove the person really signed. Really in person, really of sound mind. Paper against grief. Paper wins. That fight, every time. For 11 days I believed. Maybe I had misunderstood. Everything. Maybe she'd changed her mind. The dead. Can't clarify. That is what makes them so useful to certain kinds of living people. Then came the Tuesday. The 0 hour of my whole life. Everything I've told you happened before this morning. Everything I am about to tell you happens after it. 7:40. In the morning, I know because I was making coffee in the clock on the stove. The same clock I'd watched for 11 minutes in March. Read 7:40 when the locksmith's van pulled into the driveway. A locksmith. Scheduled. Denny had scheduled a locksmith. The way you schedule a dental cleaning. He came in without knocking. On the door, my key opened. 3 black trash bags already in his hand, folded flat, and said, "This doesn't have to be weird. Take what is yours. Take what is yours." In a house where everything I'd been for 12 years was in the walls. I packed, while a stranger drilled out the locks. Clothes. A shoebox of photographs. Her gray cardigan. He watched me take it and decided it wasn't worth the argument. 40 minutes, 3 bags, 12 years. He carried them to the porch himself and set them down the way you set out something that smells. And if that image sounds familiar, it is where you came in. At the door, he held out his hand, and for one stupid second, I thought. I don't know what I thought, and he said, "The key, Mari, the brass key, on the red string. This is yours now, not borrowed. Yours." I took it off the hook by the door. My hand knew the way, could have found it blind. And I put it in his palm, and he closed his fingers on it without ceremony. The way you take a receipt you are going to throw away. Then he said the family motto. He actually said it. Standing in her doorway, holding her key. "No hard feelings, Mari. We're not keeping score." I walked to my car. I did not cry. Write that down. Because I need you to keep count with me, and the count so far is 0. I drove to a motel on Route 40 with weekly rates, sat on a comforter the color of old mustard, and took inventory out loud, alone. Because saying it made it hold still. 36 years old. $214. No job. No address. No family. 3 trash bags and a dead woman's cardigan. If you have ever sat in the ruins of a life you built for other people, doing that same inventory, then you know the question that comes next, at around 2 in the morning. In a voice that sounds like your mother's, the question is, what if they're right about you? What if you really are just the useful one? And useful was all you ever were. Do something for me right now. Because this is the bottom of the story, and the bottom is where people scroll away. And what comes next is why I am telling you this at all. If you have ever been asked that 2 in the morning question, if somebody taught you to mistake being used for being useless, put one word in the comments. The word is unseen. Just that. You'll see why the word matters. By the end. And if you want to know what a person builds out of $214 and a cardigan, stay with me, because this is where it turns. 6 weeks after that morning, I answered a help-wanted listing that would quietly decide the rest of this story, though I didn't know it. And neither did my brother, and that is rather the point. A small law office downtown needed a filing clerk, estates, and probate. $12 an hour to start. I got it for the least glamorous reason imaginable. 6 years of managing 9 medications, on 4 schedules, turns out to be excellent training for managing a law. Office's deadlines. I said so in the interview. And they hired me on the spot. That is where I met June. June was 61, the senior paralegal, doing probate work since before I was born. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. And she could find a misfiled document, the way other people find their own hands. For the first month, she barely spoke to me. except to correct me. Then one evening in October, I stayed late, reorganizing a dead man's bank statements into chronological order, because the disorder of them was physically bothering me, and she watched me from her desk for a while. And then she rolled her chair over and looked at the tidy stacks and said, "Who'd you take care of?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "Nobody sorts a stranger's paper like that unless they've kept somebody alive with paper." Who was it? And I told her. All of it. The first person I ever told, the 6 years. The pills, the hair on Sundays. March 11th, the 2-page will, the trash bags, the key. I told it flat. The way I'd learned to tell it to myself so it wouldn't spill. June listened the whole way through, without once trying to fix it. Without once saying, "At least, or have you tried?" When I finished, she was quiet a moment. And then, she said the sentence, "I will remember, for the rest of my life." She said, "The living will tell you anything, honey. Paper is the only witness that doesn't blink." Then, she rolled her chair back and told me the statements from March were still out of order. That was June. But from that week on, she taught me not just filing, the whole machine. How an estate opens and closes. What an executor can and can't do. What a notary's journal is and why the law makes them keep one. Where paper lives and how long it lives and who is allowed to ask it questions. Now, the rebuild fast. Because survival is boring and transformation isn't. And I know which one you came for. Filing clerk, 1 year. At night, on a pawn shop laptop, a paralegal certificate. 14 months. Done in 11. Junior. Paralegal. Then probate paralegal. Second chair to June on every contested estate that came through the door. I read wills the way other people read crime novels. Because that is what half of them were. In file after file, I watched families do exactly what mine had done to me. And I learned precisely where the paper always catches them. 2 years after the porch, I could tell you within a page where a will would fall apart. 3 years after, attorneys were asking my opinion before filing. I rented a small apartment with a hook by the door, and the hook stayed empty. And every day I hung my coat next to it and didn't think about why I'd put it there. 4 years. Almost to the month. That is how long it took the past to walk through our office door. It came in a banker's box, a new client, an estate contest. Nothing to do with me. I was cataloging exhibits, and I opened a folder of notarized documents. And I stopped, because I knew the notary's name. I had spent 11 motel days 4 years earlier, rereading a photocopy of a 2-page will, until I could see it with my eyes closed. And this name, this exact stamp, was at the bottom of its second page. The notary was a woman who worked at Denny's insurance office. His co-worker. I'd met her at his Christmas party years before. Here is what you need to understand. About notaries. A notary is licensed by the state. The license, called a commission, expires and must be renewed. And the law requires every notary to keep a journal, a logbook, recording every act, who signed, what, when, and how their identity was confirmed. That logbook is the notary's alibi. It is also, if the notary has been crooked, their confession. I did what anyone could lawfully do, because notary commissions are public record. I looked hers up on the Secretary of State's website, on my lunch break. And there it was, in gray text on a white screen, and I read it 4 times. Her commission had expired 8 months before March 11th. On the date my grandmother's will was supposedly notarized, the woman whose stamp made it official had no legal authority to notarize a grocery list. I sat very still, and inside me, very quietly. 12 years of being told I was imagining things came to an end. Because here is what that expired commission meant, and I knew it immediately. In my bones and in my training, both, it didn't just mean sloppy paperwork. Ask yourself the question, I asked. Why does a man having his dying grandmother lawfully sign a lawful will use his buddy from the office with a dead stamp instead of any of the 400 licensed notaries in the county or the hospital's own notary, which St. Vincent's, like most big hospitals, keeps on staff for exactly this? There is one answer. You use a friend with a dead stamp because a real notary keeps a real journal. And a real notary would have had to walk into intensive care room 14. Look at an unconscious woman on a ventilator and refuse. The expired stamp wasn't the crime. The expired stamp was the shadow, the crime cast on a public website, where it sat for 4 years, waiting for the one person on earth who was trained to see it and had a reason to look. That evening, I told June. I laid it out on her desk, the photocopy I'd kept for 4 years, the database printout, the dates. She read it with her glasses on, taking her time. Then she took the glasses off and said, "You know this office can't take your case. You are staff. You are a party. It has to be clean." I said I knew. She nodded slowly, wrote a name and a phone number on a sticky note. An attorney, 2 towns over. An old colleague, sharp and boring in exactly the right proportions. And pushed it across the desk, and then she allowed herself one sentence. The only editorial comment June ever made about my family. She said, "Blink, you son of a gun. Before I show you what we found, let me answer the question the smart ones are already asking. Because this story doesn't work unless every door I walk through is a legal door." 4 years had passed. Isn't there a deadline to challenge a will? Yes. Yes. Normally the window is months, not years. And mine had closed while I was sorting a stranger's bank statements for $12 an hour. But the law has a rule for exactly this situation. And the rule, in plain words, is that fraud stops the clock. If a will was procured by fraud, a forged signature, a fake notarization, the deadline doesn't start running until the fraud could reasonably have been discovered. You cannot cheat someone and then hide behind the calendar while they're still in the dark. You put them in. The day I found that expired commission on a public website was, legally speaking, day 1. My attorney, the sharp, boring man from June's sticky note, filed a petition to reopen my grandmother's estate on the grounds of fraud. And here is the part I need you to appreciate, because this is the actual revenge. And it is quieter and colder, and so much better than any speech I could have made in that living room. 4 years earlier, I didn't have to prove anything. By shouting, I didn't have to convince a single relative. The petition simply asked the court to make 3 pieces of paper, answer 3 questions under oath. That is all a fraud case is. When you strip it down, you put the liar's own documents in a room with the truth's documents. And you watch which one starts sweating. Paper. Number 1. The will itself. The 2-pager, dated March 11th, at the bottom, above her supposed signature, a line stating it was signed at her home on Corliss Avenue, in the presence of the notary and 2 witnesses. Her home. Corliss Avenue. on March 11th. Paper number 2. The records from St. Vincent's Medical Center, which my attorney obtained by subpoena. That is a court order that makes an institution hand over its files, whether anyone likes it or not. Admission, March 8th. Intensive care, ventilated, and continuously sedated, per the physician's notes. From March 9th through March 19th, 40 miles from Corliss Avenue. The hospital chart for March 11th, the day she allegedly sat at her own kitchen table, signing legal documents, records her condition hour by hour, and I will give you exactly one line from it. Because one is all this needs. 11:15 in the morning, nursing note, patient unresponsive to verbal stimuli. That is the whole case. A 2-page will says, a woman sat in her kitchen and signed her life away. A 300-page hospital chart, written in real time by a dozen strangers with no stake in anything, says that at that same hour she could not open her eyes. The living will tell you anything. Paper is the only witness that doesn't blink, but we weren't done because I wanted it welded shut. So, paper number 3, the notary's logbook. The law required her to keep one. The court required her to produce it. And when she did, her journal, call it the logbook from here on, had no entry for March 11th. No entry for my grandmother. Ever. Not that day. Not any day. Her own mandatory record, the alibi the state makes every notary keep, contained no evidence that the central legal act of her stamp's career had ever occurred. Under deposition, sworn questioning, under oath. With a court reporter taking down every word, she lasted 40 minutes before her attorney asked for a break. When they came back, she had traded the truth for whatever protection it could buy. Yes. She had stamped it as a favor. No. She had never met my grandmother. No. She was not present at any signing. It was already signed when Denny brought it to her desk. He told her it was a formality. He told her, and this is a direct quote from a sworn transcript, so savor it. He told her, it is fine. It is what Grandma wanted. We're just cleaning up loose ends. Loose ends. She stamped it between claims adjustments, with a dead commission, and undid a woman's dying wishes, as a favor, between coworkers. And then, in the middle of all this cold paper, the estate file gave me back something warm. I have to slow down here, because it is the reason I am not bitter today. And I was not braced for it. Reopening the estate meant gathering everything of Rosa's that had legal weight, and her old attorney, a semi-retired man with an office above a bakery, whom Denny never contacted, because Denny had manufactured his own paperwork. Still had her file in a fireproof cabinet, and in that file was her actual will, the real one. Signed 3 years before her death, the same spring, it turns out, as the Saturday Denny came with his folder, and she pushed it back with 2 fingers and said it is already handled. She hadn't been comforting me with vague old lady talk. She had taken the bus at 79 with a cane, to an office above a bakery. And she had handled it. The real will was 6 pages, witnessed, properly notarized, unimpeachable, the house on Corliss Avenue. To Marisol Vega, her savings divided with a bequest to her great-granddaughter. Denny's little girl, the only other person in that family who ever climbed onto Rosa's bed just to be near her. And to Denny, 1 paragraph, which the probate judge would later read aloud in open court in a level voice, while my brother studied the table in front of him. to my grandson Denny, who asked me once to sign my life over to him for safekeeping. I leave my forgiveness, which he will need, and nothing else, which is what he offered me. She saw him, 3 years early, with 2 working fingers and a slow tongue. She saw him whole, and she answered him in writing, in the one language he thought belonged to him. And in the same file, same box, 1 folder deeper, was a sealed envelope with my name on it, in her careful post-stroke handwriting. And inside the envelope was a letter I will keep private, except for 1 line, and the blue composition notebook. The ledger. 6 years of nightly entries. And it was not what I had believed for 6 years. Walking past that sticky drawer, feeling like a debt. It was the opposite. It was the opposite. Every page dated, in her slow uphill hand. March 4th. Mari, up at 2 a.m. with me. Back to work at 7. April 9th. Mary paid the water heater $1,100. Told me it was under warranty. It was not under warranty. I checked. Page after page, after page, after page. Hours. Dollars. Sundays. She had written down the copays I'd hidden from her. My double shifts, the birthday I spent in an emergency room, holding her purse. 6 years. Over 2,000 days. And she had missed almost none of them. And on the inside of the back cover, in the largest letters her hand could still make, she had written the line from the letter. The line I will give you. The line I had to pull over on Route 40 to survive. Because there are things you cannot read at 55 miles an hour. She wrote, "They say, we're not keeping score." I kept it. You won. It was never close. That is once. In the car, on the shoulder of Route 40, with the hazards going, holding a composition notebook. You've been keeping count with me. And that is the count. Total for this entire story. Once. Once. She'd earned it. No one else ever would. Now. The reckoning. If you came for a screaming match, I am going to disappoint you. And then satisfy you more than a screaming match ever could. It happened at a court-ordered mediation. On a Thursday at 10 in the morning. 14 weeks after we filed. Mediation is a formal settlement meeting, a neutral referee. Both sides, both attorneys. 1 long table. Denny came in a good suit with a bad lawyer, or a good lawyer with a bad case, which looks identical from across a table. My mother came too, though she wasn't a party because she has never missed a performance. She tried a warm, wounded smile on me. I looked at her. The way you look at weather. Denny's attorney opened, with the speech I knew was coming. Grief is hard. Families remember things differently. My client acted in good faith. Surely this can be resolved, without dragging a family through the mud. When he finished, my attorney looked at me, because we had agreed this part was mine, not because it was dramatic, because I'd earned it, and could be trusted to do it the way we'd planned. Flat. Numbered. No adjectives. I said 3 things, and then we'll take your answer. 1. On March 11th, your client's document says our grandmother signed her estate away at her kitchen table. St. Vincent's hospital chart for that hour says she was unresponsive on a ventilator 40 miles away. Both of those cannot be true. And one of them was written by 12 strangers with no motive. 2. The notary whose stamp appears on that document has testified under oath that she never met our grandmother, was present at no signing, and stamped a pre-signed paper at her desk as a favor to your client. Using a commission that had been expired for 8 months, her logbook, which the law required her to keep, contains no entry. That testimony is transcribed, sworn, and done. It does not go away, no matter what happens in this room. 3. Our grandmother's genuine will, professionally drafted, properly witnessed, and validly notarized 3 years before her death, has been produced from her attorney's files. It leaves the house. To me, it leaves your client his forgiveness and nothing else. Those are her words, not mine. So here is what we're offering. Once, your client consents to reopening the estate and admitting the genuine will. He signs over the house and he vacates his tenants because we know about the tenants and the rent. And we'll get to the rent. He repays what he collected without a trial. In exchange, we will let the civil case be the end of what we pursue. What the state does with a sworn transcript describing forgery and fraudulent notarization is the state's business. We can't and won't promise anyone's silence to a prosecutor, and his attorney can explain to him why no one can. But we will not spend $1 extra making this louder than it has to be. He has until Monday at 5 p.m. That is all I have. And then I did the thing I had waited 4 years to do. Nothing. Nothing. I sat back. I let the paper talk. Denny looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer looked at the documents, and my mother looked at me and said, Marisol, in the voice, the old voice, the hallway voice, how can you do this to your family? And I want you to notice, because I noticed that she had seen the hospital records by then. She had seen what he did, and her question was still for me. I didn't answer her, but I'll answer her here. For you, once. You do it with a subpoena. Mom, that is how. It turns out that is how you were supposed to do it all along. They folded on Monday at 11 in the morning, 6 hours before the deadline, not because Denny grew a conscience, because his attorney could read, and what he read was a case with no other side. Now, the consequences, plainly, one at a time, since flat and factual, is how verdicts sound. The court reopened the estate, admitted the genuine will, and voided the forged one, with a written finding, public record, in the file forever, that the earlier document was, and I quote the order, procured by fraud and invalid from its inception. The judge read Rose's paragraph about Denny into the record because the genuine will had to be read, and that is how it came to pass that a room full of strangers heard our grandmother's verdict on him. In a level judicial voice, while he studied the table, the house came back. The deed, the ownership record, was corrected, and about those tenants. Denny had never lived on Corliss Avenue. He'd rented it out within 2 months of the trash bags. At $1,600 a month for 48 months, that is $76,800. Collected on a stolen house. Think of it as 4 years of a stranger's rent, pocketed off a forged signature. The settlement required him to repay it into the estate, where the genuine will directed it. And to cover the estate's legal fees on top, he had to refinance his own home. To do it, the man who took a paid-off house with 2 pages of fraud spent the next decade paying interest on getting caught. The notary was reported by the court itself, not by me. Some referrals are automatic, which is a beautiful thing about systems. They don't need your rage to run to the Secretary of State and the county prosecutor. She was fined, permanently barred from holding a commission. And the insurance office being unwilling to employ a confessed document. Fraudster in a building full of signatures. Fired. Denny was terminated within the month. For the same reason, insurance is an industry with one product, and the product is trust. And his transcript was public. The state's own case against him ended in a plea. A felony record in exchange for no jail. I didn't attend. I had work. And then came the escalation, right on schedule, because people like my family do not experience consequences. They experience persecution. Denny called. 11 times in the first month. I counted. Counting is a habit now. His voicemails traveled the whole arc, from "You've made your point. Call me," through "You are really going to do this over a house," landing finally on a long, self-pitying message about how Grandma would be ashamed of what I'd become. I saved that one. Early on, I'd play it, and then read one page of the blue notebook. Any page. Like a palate cleanser. My mother sent a 4-page letter on her good stationery, containing the words disappointed, ashamed, ungrateful, and dramatic, and not containing. I checked twice, the way Rosa would have, the word sorry. She showed up at my office. Once, June met her in the lobby, looked her over like a badly assembled exhibit binder, said, "She is at lunch," at 11 in the morning, and stood there until the performance found a different theater. I answered one communication. Total. Denny's last voicemail asked, with real bewilderment. The only honest question he'd asked in 4 years. "Why are you doing this?" I texted back one sentence. And then I blocked the number. And the sentence was this: "You said we weren't keeping score, but she kept it. And you lost. So, what did I get? What I didn't get first. Because I owe you the truth more than a bow on top. I didn't get my family back. There was no tearful reunion, no Thanksgiving, where everyone finally saw me. My mother tells anyone who will listen that I destroyed her son over money. And the relatives who thought I was a freeloader for 12 years think I am a viper now. The genuine will didn't restore my family. It just told the truth about them in writing, which is all paper can do. Paper doesn't perform miracles. It just doesn't. Blink. Here is what I did get. I got the house. I moved back into Corliss Avenue on a Saturday in October. 4.5 years after the trash bags. I stood in the living room where the hospital bed had been, where the light still comes in the same way. And I put her gray cardigan over the back of her chair, where it lives now. And always will. I got my career, which I would never have found without losing everything. Sit with the shape of that, because I have. Denny put me out with $214, and the job I took to survive it is the exact job that taught me how to catch him. He built his own auditor. He mailed his crime, postage paid, to the one address in the world where someone would eventually be trained to open it. I am a senior probate paralegal now. Contested estates are my specialty. When a family walks into our office in the quiet one, the caregiver sits at the end of the table while the confident ones talk. I find that person's eyes and hold them a second longer than I need to, and something passes between us that has no name. But at you, if you commented that word earlier, understand completely. I got the bequest to my great-niece honored, and I got the thread that came with it. Denny's daughter is 13 now. Her mother, Denny's wife, left him about a year into the aftermath and took the kids. Lets her visit. She comes on Sundays sometimes. She likes the crossword and is terrible at it, which is a family tradition. One Sunday, she found the blue notebook on the shelf and asked what it was. And I told her this story, at 13-year-old length. When I finished, she was quiet. And then she said, "So great, Grandma was watching the whole time." And I said yes. And she said, "That is kind of like God, but with better handwriting." Rosa would have laughed until it cost her something. And I got the key back. On the day of the closing, the paperwork day, the day the deed came home. Denny's attorney handed my attorney a plain white envelope of house keys, the locksmith's keys, the stranger's keys, but taped inside the lid of a box of Rosa's things, the settlement made him return. Someone had put the brass key. The red string was gone. Just the key. I carried it home in my shirt pocket, over the heart, which is sentimental. And I don't care. I bought red string, the same cheap kind, and tied it the way she tied it. And it hangs right now on the little cup hook by the front door of the house on Corliss Avenue, next to my own key. 2 keys where 2 keys used to hang. And here's what I finally understand about it. 12 years ago, I thought it was just a key. And then for 4 years, it was the thing that was taken. Proof of what I lost, an empty hook in a rented apartment. I hung my coat next to every day and pretended not to see. It was never either of those. "This is yours." "Now," she said, "not borrowed. Yours." She wasn't handing me away into her house. She was telling me, on day 1, in the only language that ever held up. A physical object, a fact you can put on a hook. What everyone else would spend 12 years denying, and 2 pages of fraud trying to erase. That I belonged somewhere. Belonging was the thing he drilled out of that door. Belonging is what came back in a shirt pocket. The key opens the same lock. It always did. It just took me 12 years to learn what was on the other side of it. The blue notebook sits on the shelf above her chair. Next to it sits a second composition notebook. Same cheap kind, blue marbled cover. And this one is mine. And some nights I sit at the kitchen table where she sat, and I write in it, who showed up, what it cost them, what I saw that nobody knows I saw. My niece, on Sundays. June, who retired last spring, who comes for coffee that could strip paint, and tells me my filing has gotten sloppy, which is a lie, and a love language, because that turned out to be Rosa's actual bequest. Bigger than the house, bigger than the money, she left me the job. Somebody has to keep the record the family swears. Nobody's keeping. Somebody has to be the witness that doesn't blink. They'll tell you the score doesn't matter. And here is what I know now. At her kitchen table, with her pen, they only ever say it to the player who is winning. Nobody says we're not keeping score. To the one who is losing, the losing one gets told to be grateful. So when you hear that sentence, and if you commented unseen, you've heard it, understand it for what it is. It is not a family value. It is a confession made in advance. If this story found you in your own motel room, on your own Route 40, listen to me. Keep going to work. Keep learning the machine. How paper is patient, and so, it turns out, are you. You've already survived the part where they win. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. True in the ways that matter, told by people who kept the receipts. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And whether somebody in your life once wrote it all down for you, when you thought no one was looking. We're not keeping score, they said. She kept it. In a 70-cent notebook, in handwriting that walked uphill, for 6 years, by lamplight. At the kitchen table, where I am sitting right now, You won, she wrote. It was never close. It was never close.